Oh hey Randy's! I didn't see you there. I was just sitting here reading my book really close to my face and thinking about past Christmas memories. Of them all, I still think the best one by far was Christmas 2000, where I was lucky enough to get not only a Game Boy Color, but also a brand new copy of Pokémon Silver to go with it. Back then, this was a huge deal, as my parents didn't have a ton of expendable income, and my childlike mind couldn't get over the fact that I got both of these wonderful presents. Either way, I played the heck out of Pokémon Silver, and I think I can honestly say that without my experience with that game, I probably wouldn't be the diehard Nintendo and especially Pokémon fan that I am today. What exactly do I mean by all that? Well, I guess you're just gonna have to wait and find out. But for now, let's get into it. Here's my review of Pokémon Generation 2. The games. Pokémon Gold and Silver were probably two of the most hyped games of the late 1990s, but after almost a year of teasing, Ho-Oh was in the first episode for Pete's sake. They were finally released to the North American public on October 15th, 2000, over 2 years after their global predecessors. It was during this time that Pokémania was still in full effect, and these sequels quickly became the most popular titles of the holiday season, at least in my neighborhood. Almost a year after this, Game Freak tried to keep the momentum going by releasing the first official sister game, Pokémon Crystal. Unlike Pokémon Yellow, this wasn't a reskin per se, but more of an amalgamation of the two original experiences with added elements to keep things just fresh enough for fans who already owned a version. This model would eventually be adapted for all subsequent generations, and in my opinion done even better, but at the time this was a very smart idea to say the least. Because I personally think it's the true second generation experience, I'll be showing off footage mostly from Crystal version for this review. But for the most part, the game's narrative and mechanics are identical, so my analysis is going to apply to the entire generation as a whole. But every great game needs a great story. So, let's dive in. The story. If you've played a main series Pokemon game, then you should know the story by now. In this case, a 10-year-old named Ethan, or if you're playing Crystal, a 10-year-old girl named Chris, are ready to start their adventure to become a Pokemon master in the brand new region of Johto, which has literally been beside Kanto this entire time. Neat. Anyways, our chosen hero meets up with Professor Elm in their home base of New Bark Town, where he has an important errand for them to run. They must visit Mr. Pokemon and retrieve a special item for the professor so that he can further his studies on Pokemon evolution. He allows the player to take one of 3 brand new starter Pokemon as means of protection, and it's here that the player makes one of the most important decisions they'll face throughout the game. Do you pick Chikorita, the feisty grass type, Totodile, the rambunctious water type, or Cyndaquil, the adorable fire type? I personally chose Cyndaquil for my playthrough because of nostalgia reasons, but like the previous gen, you can't really go wrong with either of these starters. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that next to the original generation, of course, these may be the best starter designs of the series, but I digress. After venturing north of Cherry Grove City and retrieving a mysterious egg from Mr. Pokemon, as well as a brand new Pokédex from Professor Oak himself, the player returns back home to discover the lab's been broken into and a Pokemon's been stolen. I wonder who it could have been. Eventually you track down the thief, canonically named Silver, who happens to have stolen the exact Pokemon who has a type advantage to your chosen starter. Yes folks, this Ron Weasley wannabe is in fact your rival throughout the game, but unlike Blue, he's much more troubled rather than needlessly annoying. After you've dispatched of Silver, it's time to begin your adventure anew, as you set out for Violet City. If you've picked Chikorita, then this gym can be a pain, but with enough experience you'll overcome Violet's gym leader Faulkner and quickly move on to the next area, Azalea Town. It's here that you'll meet Kurt, a man who turns apricots into specialized Pokeballs, and apparently is the de facto protector of the town. After following the elderly man to the nearby Slowpoke well, you'll stumble upon none other than Team Rocket, who've been cutting off the Slowpoke's tails in order to turn a profit. After resolving the matter, Kurt will award you with the Lure Ball for your help, and you can finally take on Azalea's gym leader, Bugsy. Once defeated, Bugsy will award you the Hive Badge, and you'll be ready to trek through Ilex Forest after another confrontation with Silver. It's in Ilex Forest that you'll come upon a shrine, where if you trigger the GS Ball event, you can capture the mythical Pokemon Celebi. Sadly, I don't live in 2001 Japan, or have an action replay on me, so I couldn't trigger the event. But I certainly think it's worth bringing up, if only because this was the first event legendary ever implemented into a main series game. After your journey through the forest, you'll immediately find the daycare, which has been improved and expanded upon since its inception in Pokémon Red and Blue. Now, if you leave two Pokémon of opposite genders, who have at least one egg group in common, you may find a surprise egg when you return to pick them up. This breeding system may be one of the most crucial additions to the franchise, as it gave players a way to finally obtain the exact Pokémon they were after, which infinitely expanded the metagame possibilities. I suppose this would also be a great time to talk about the gender mechanics introduced in this generation. Unlike Generation 1, all Pokemon besides legendaries and some oddities are assigned a gender. There's still some like Tauros and Miltank that are 100% male or female regardless of what you do, but for the most part every Pokemon now comes in two varieties, which only adds to the science of Pokemon breeding. The only downside to this feature is the fact that in Generation 2, male and female Pokemon are determined based on their stats, and for some absurd reason, Pokemon are female if they have a below average attack stat. Because of this, many female Pokemon are unable to be shiny, but I'll get into that mechanic a little later on. But yeah, the gender feature, although amazing, still had a few issues that would get fixed later on throughout the series. Anyways, the player eventually enters Goldenrod City, which is sort of like Johto's version of Celadon. You got underground tunnels, casinos, magnet trains, supermarkets, Bill, and much, much more. Oh, and you also have Whitney, the city's gym leader and all-around crybaby, who has this milk tank that I've never really found that bad. If you've battled every trainer and raised an okay team at this point in the game, she really shouldn't give you as much trouble as the internet claims. With Whitney beat, players can then move forward to the historic Ecruteak City, but if it's a Tuesday, Thursday, or Saturday, they can first take part in the optional bug-catching contest. This specialized contest was supposed to serve as a replacement for the Safari Zone, but in my opinion, it's more of a time filler than anything else. It is, however, indicative of a larger new feature, the day and night system. As some of you have probably already noticed by now, this gen introduces a day and night cycle based on real-world time that you input before the campaign even begins. This effectively allows certain levels, battles, and even certain Pokemon to be discovered, all depending on what time of day or week it may be while you play. It's a pretty neat mechanic, but it's also the reason why your original Gold, Silver, and Crystal cartridges can't hold a save file anymore, so it's a sort of bittersweet addition to say the least. Once you've made it to Ecruteak, you'll almost immediately get swept up in the city's folklore and its legends of the tin and burned down towers. In Gold and Silver, exploring the burned down ruins of the Brass Tower is completely optional. But if you do, you'll eventually come across the three legendary beasts, Suicune, Entei, and Raikou. I'll get more in depth with the latter two later, but because of Crystal, I have to give Suicune, the game's mascot, some special attention here, because this was the first time a legendary Pokemon actually became a part of the narrative. In Crystal version, players will meet Yucine, who has studied and been obsessed with Johto's legendary Pokemon, specifically Suicune, since he can remember. Eventually, after events that I'll cover in detail later, Suicune can be battled in Ecruteak's Tin Tower, but at this point you've probably already ran into the Ice-type beast a few times around the region. Either way, Ecruteak City has a lot going on. But before you leave, make sure you challenge its gym leader Morty and acquire Surf from an old man, because you're going to need it very soon. Once our hero makes it to Olivine City, they'll discover that the lighthouse Pokemon Ampharos is ill and desperately needs medicine from Cianwood City across the sea. It's here that you can battle Chuck, a fighting-type gym leader, and get Fly, which makes traveling a breeze. After obtaining the medicine in question, it's time to heal Ampharos and face off against the Steel-type gym leader Jasmine, who should honestly be a breeze compared to Chuck. And yes, I said Steel-type. That's because this stellar generation added not one, but two new Pokemon types in order to further balance the game. Sabrina, eat your heart out. The player then heads east to Mahogany Town, but things seem off. And as usual, Team Rocket's the group to blame. Apparently they've been emitting sound waves in hopes of rapidly speeding up the local Magikarp's evolution into the much more lucrative Gyarados. This also results in a weird side effect, as one of the Gyarados is a bold red color, or at least that's what the game tells you. What they don't explain in great detail is that in this generation, 1 in every 8,192 random encounters with a wild Pokemon could result in a different colored or shiny variant of the creature. But once again, I am saving that feature for just a little later on. It's at the Lake of Rage, where the red Gyarados calls home, that you'll meet the former champion Lance. You know, the Dragon Master who barely uses dragons? Lance is in Mahogany searching for the source of the Gyarados issue, and together the two of you will take down Team Rocket at their secret base. As it turns out, Team Rocket was simply testing radio waves in order to gain practice for their real plan, taking over the radio tower back in Goldenrod. Apparently their former leader Giovanni has been missing during the 3 years between the game's narratives, and Team Rocket believes that by using the radio, they'll finally locate their missing boss. And with that, it's off to Goldenrod City to thwart their sort of desperate but nefarious plan. However, first you may want to win the Glacier Badge from Mahogany's gym leader Bryce. Once back in Goldenrod, you'll get your diehard on as you make your way through the overtaken radio tower one floor at a time and rescue some hostages along the way. Sadly, there's no twist reveal here, or even a true big bad to confront, and after beating their final executive, the group decides to put the organization to rest once and for all. Not bad for a 10-year-old. It's also after this moment in Gold, Silver, and Crystal that you'll be given the Rainbow and Silver Wings and the Crystal Bell respectively, meaning you can now go and capture some mascot legendaries, depending on which version you own. And after that, it's off to the Ice Cave in order to make your way to the final gym leader, Claire, in Blackthorn City. However, once you've bested Claire, she insists that you're still not ready to fight the Elite Four, and sends you on one final quest to retrieve a Dragon Fang, or, once again in the case of Crystal, a diverging mission in which you have to impress her grandfather. Either way, once the task is complete, Claire will relent and give you your 8th and final badge. Now it's up to you to grab your HM Slave, head east of New Barktown, and take on the Elite Four in the Kanto region to fulfill your Poké destiny. First up though, you'll need to take on Silver one final time, and if you successfully overcome your bratty rival, he'll finally relent and admit that perhaps he's been sort of a jerk the entire time. And with that, the final test awaits. Now, I'm not kidding, you need to be ready for this version of the Elite Four. It was challenging as a kid, and it's still challenging now. The marathon of specialized trainers will leave you winded and broke if you don't come prepared, so make sure you have a balanced team, a ton of revives, and an iron resolve as you finally walk into the first room. Immediately, you'll come across the psychic trainer Will, a new addition to the Elite Four who never once explains where the heck Lorelei went. After this, you'll come upon Koga, the former poison-using leader of Fuchsia City's gym. He's gotten a promotion and a few new Johto additions to his team, but he's still nothing compared to the league's next challenger, Bruno, the fighting-type master. Ha, take that, Chuck. Bruno's not actually too bad, but his Machamp can be a pain. Once he's defeated though, you can make your way to former member Agatha's granddaughter Karen and her powerful team of Dark-type Pokémon. And finally, with those 4 out of the way, you can fight the Indigo League champion. It's here you'll find Lance and his powerful Sorta Dragon team. But if you've come this far and you have a decent ice move, you can take him down and officially become the new league champion like Red and Blue before you. It's then that you have a chat with Professor Oak, register your Pokemon comrades in the Hall of Fame, and get to see those beautiful, well-earned credits. You did it, and now it's time to rest your weary bones. After you visited Kanto, of course. That's right, this game features a full post-credits campaign, and lets you revisit the previous region all on one Game Boy Color cartridge. This was apparently done because Game Freak thought they'd be finished with the series once these games were released, and really wanted to leave a lasting impression on players, and boy did they, because as a kid, and even to this day, this is a feature that no other generation has, and it adds a ton to the game's overall experience. All of the places and people you remember from Red, Blue, and Yellow are 3 years older, and it's just really cool to find out what everyone's been up to after the events of the first game. For example, some gym leaders like Surge and Sabrina are pretty much the exact same, but others like Blaine and Koga have found new replacement gyms and gym leaders respectively. Unfortunately, there's really not a ton to do in Kanto this time around, as most stores and landmarks are gone or closed off, such as the Safari Zone. But I still appreciate every bit of effort that was poured into recreating the beloved region, and these games simply wouldn't be the same without the addition. But after receiving your 8th and final Kanto Gym Badge from the one and only Blue, it's time to make your way to the true final boss of the game, the legendary champion Red. It seems like the pressures of being a world-renowned champion have gotten to the 13-year-old, as not only is he located in a secluded mountain, but he's also backing 6 insanely high-leveled Pokemon with him. But as his final over-leveled Pokemon goes down, and you're left with the confidence that you've grown even stronger than, well, your past self, the journey is finally over, and you can rest easy knowing that you did it. You're now the greatest Pokemon trainer that's ever lived. Overall, Gen 2's storyline, though thematically the same as its predecessors, is also a breath of fresh air. The development team clearly offered to go with a story grounded in legend and mysticism, rather than Red and Blue's more scientific approach, and I think it works out really well. Every area feels distinctive and has its own landmarks and characters. Silver is probably the best written rival of any generation, and the story behind Ecruteak's history is almost as interesting as the mystery of Mewtwo. On top of that, we also get to explore and catch up with everything from those beloved past titles, which makes the narrative one of the most memorable of the series. But I need to calm down, and instead of completely gushing now, let's get a little more focused as we shift towards the strength segment of the review. The pros. Okay, so I know this is already a meaty video, so I'll probably try to keep these sections more simplistic, but at its core, this game has content in spades. The day and night cycles, breeding mechanics, myths and character backgrounds, vast and distinctive landscapes, refined battle system, one of the greatest rivals in the history of Pokemon games, and even smaller additions like different sprites in each version and the introduction of shiny Pokemon make this game the perfect sequel. Right off the bat, it also fixes two of my biggest gripes from the first generation of games, the inventory system and Pokeballs missing their targets. In Pokemon GSC, the player's bag can still get very full at times, and you will definitely find yourself using the item storage system on the PC at least once. But not only is the bag now bigger, but it's also segmented into sections. Instead of having items like HM04, a rare candy, a Master Ball, and the bicycle all together in one pouch, they're broken into 4 different compartments, allowing you to retain important items and hoard specialty items like TMs as much as you want. The limits feel gone, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm also thankful that, like I mentioned previously, Pokeballs no longer miss if a high-leveled or legendary Pokemon isn't afflicted by a status problem first. As unlikely as it is that I'd ever catch a level 60 Ho-Oh with a Pokeball, I can at least rest easy now knowing that I don't necessarily need a Pokemon like Jigglypuff or Haunter to put it to sleep first. I can just throw any type of ball and let the odds play out, which is nice. And speaking of legendaries, as I've mentioned before, I love how every single one in this game has its own urban legend or myth surrounding it, so by the time you actually encounter a Lugia or a legendary dog, there's this extra weight and backstory that makes these battles feel more important to your journey. I still do believe that Mewtwo's story was handled better and was more nuanced in the original games, but there's no denying that the legendary Pokemon in this game not only help make the narrative stand out more, but also towns like Ecruteak really shine because of them. Another thing this game got right from a technical standpoint is introducing the 2 new types, Dark and Steel. On one hand, yeah, it's awesome that we got great new Pokemon like Umbreon and Steelix, but even more so, it finally felt like Psychic types were beatable for once, and these additions really helped the metagame blossom into what it is today, along with breeding of course. There's a reason why it took 4 more generations of Pokemon games to incorporate a brand new type into the series, and it's because these games were balanced so well. Another big reason for this is because they finally split the special stat from Gen 1 into both special attack and special defense. And even though for some reason the games consider moves like Ice Punch to be special rather than physical, it was still a huge leap in refreshing the very ways players strategized. It was also with these games that Pokemon really started showing signs that it could be more than just a great game. It could also become a great competitive RPG in its own right. But that wouldn't really take full effect until the Advanced Generation. Among the new changes, the music is also a standout. Now, I'll be the first to say that I think that Gen 1 still has better music, but they're both so close that it doesn't really matter. At many times I found myself humming the National Park theme or weirdly getting into the surf theme, and the Kanto Gym Leader remix actually took me aback when I heard it for the first time in years. It's crazy to think the composer for both this game and the last entries, Junichi Masuda, is now the director of the main series of games, but if he's half as good at directing people as he is at creating insanely catchy music, then it completely makes sense. I could sit here and discuss the music all day, but let's be frank. I know it's spectacular, you know it's spectacular, and if you don't, then I urge you to search up some of the OST online. It's the perfect blend of soulful listening and millennial synth. But now we move on to everyone's favorite part, the Pokemon themselves. Now, it's no secret that for a long time, Gen 2 had the distinction of being the generation with the least amount of new designs, only adding 100 for a grand total of 251 creatures. And although many see this as a problem, I see it as debatable. There are absolutely flaws, and I'll address them in a bit, but for now, let's just focus on the positives. The legendary Pokemon stand out and are all memorable, and I honestly believe that every generation should follow this template, wherein there's 2 mascots, a trio of similar but powerful entities, and 1 mythical unobtainable secret. I personally think this is the way to go because arguably this was really the last generation where every legendary seems to have gravity and a history to them. I mean, it's sorta tricky to build a mythology around like 10 different legendaries, but this isn't the time to discuss that. Either way, there are some serious standout designs in this generation, and here's a list of my favorites. Scizor, Totodile, Meganium, Steelix, Togetic, Mantine, Crobat, Lantern, Ampharos, Politoed, Aipom, Yanma, Quagsire, Espeon, Umbreon, Misdreavus, Wobbuffet, Heracross, Skarmory, the legendary dogs, Tyranitar, and Celebi. That's 24 friggin' Pokemon that are either excellently designed or memorable as hell, and that's me holding back the other legendaries and starter evolutions. So yes, it sucks that there's only 100 new Pokemon, but when at least a quarter of them are that astounding, it's no wonder why those who prefer Gen 2 are always arguing why that's not such a bad thing. Quality over quantity. But I think now, while discussing Pokemon, it's finally time for me to go a little more in-depth into their shiny variants. It's commonly assumed that Game Freak initially created shinies as a way to take advantage of the Game Boy Color's broader palette, and wow am I glad they did. Finding a shiny Pokemon, besides the Red Gyarados of course, is still to this day one of the most special moments for fans of any generation, and I'd assume that when these games first came out, many kids like myself didn't even know they existed. In my review of Gen 1, I got a lot of flack because I didn't entirely understand how repels worked, and the reason for that major mistake on my part is because of shiny Pokemon. When I was younger, I never used repels because I was basically ignorant of items altogether, but since then I've still yet to use them because no matter where I am or what I'm doing in a Pokemon game, I never want to eliminate the possibility that the next encounter could be a shiny. I'm aware that this is sort of weird and very unnecessary as it's basically just a cosmetic difference, but that's what the notion of shiny Pokemon means to me and many other players around the world, and that's why an edition like this was so special. Although, because in this generation shiny Pokemon are completely based on the specific stats of the random Pokemon encountered, the whole gender thing does sorta suck. But finally, I want to wrap up this section with probably my favorite part of Generation 2 as a whole, Silver's character arc. The guy starts as this bratty, thieving little kid with a temper and abandonment issues, and by the end of the game, during the final encounter, you feel for him. You actually understand that he's discovered why he can't become stronger, and that using Pokemon as tools never works out. I don't want to spoil the reveal that would eventually become canon during the remakes of these games, but essentially what starts as a character lashing out for these odd reasons becomes clear, and you begin to see why a person in his shoes would believe that using others and putting on an aggressive act all of the time equates to power and control. It's pretty subdued writing, but it leaves folks like myself who dig a little deeper into this stuff with legitimate emotions over a pixelated character. Not too shabby for a kid's game at all. So of course, that wasn't every great addition to the game. There's still the happiness system, side quests like the Ruins of Elf, and much more I could get into, but these were the major highlights of a pretty marvelous game. But are there any faults I had upon replaying this childhood nostalgia trip? Well, of course, it's me, guys. So let's dive into the not-so-good aspects of Pokémon Generation 2. The cons. So what could a game like this possibly get wrong? Well, admittedly not much, but there are a few elements worth talking about. For starters, there really is no villainous crime organization in this game. I mean, yes, there's Team Rocket of course, but in this gen they're just sort of this bumbling group of sad former members who can't accept Giovanni's defeat. And that's not entirely a bad thing. I actually think in many ways it's sort of a breath of fresh air that for once the plan isn't world domination, and instead it's something as simple as taking over a radio station. It just feels a lot more manageable for a 10-year-old, doesn't it? My only real issue is that I wish they'd given the group a leader at least. You know, someone memorable like Giovanni? In fact, this game has the exact opposite effect on me than the last game, where I wasn't so much a fan of Team Rocket, but did enjoy their crime boss gym leader. Instead, this game's organization is sort of memorable for the Red Gyarados and Slowpoke things, but when the climax happens in the radio tower, it just sort of falls short of what you're hoping for. It leaves you really craving more, as it's only just beginning to get good. I think it could have been cool if we'd gotten some more Team Rocket and Kanto, or possibly even an answer to where Giovanni's been, but sadly that wouldn't happen until the remake several years later. And speaking of Kanto, I'd be remiss if I didn't once again discuss how bland the area can feel at times. Yes, there's a whole quest with the power plant malfunctioning, and seeing the old areas and talking to old faces is a blast, don't get me wrong, but every time you go to do something fun, there's construction or security or a locked door. Now, it's not so bad in small doses, but that sort of thing is very frequent as you're collecting the second set of gym badges. But, I mean, in many ways, this is sort of like complaining that you got an extra chicken McNugget, but it was shaped like a boot rather than a circle. It's still an extra portion, and my god is it tasty. And all that really leaves left are the Pokemon themselves, and yes, there are some very bad or at least forgettable designs among the bunch. Some of these not so great creatures include Cleffa and Igglybuff, Natu, the Hoppipline, Snubbull, Sunflora, Dunsparce, Remoraid, Stantler, Tyrogue, and of course everyone's least favorite weird pseudo-legendary alphabet thing, Unknown. And in concept, Unknown's certainly interesting, and because of the excellent film, very memorable, but to devote a very lackluster side quest of the game to unlocking and capturing 28 versions of Alphabet Soup just seems overly tedious. Sorta like a 30-minute review of a Pokemon game. But by far the worst part of these games are the roaming legendaries. I know, I literally just praised their designs, and yes, with their mythology and incredible Crystal exclusive battle remix, they're magnificent creatures that every player should catch. The problem is, the game makes that really friggin' hard to do. Crystal version gets a little bit of leeway as they basically just give you Suicune after a certain point in the game, but in either version you play, there will be at minimum 2 legendary beasts roaming around Johto that can be major pains to find. Now in some cases, like when I was a kid, this wasn't so bad as I lucked out and randomly encountered them during my playthrough, which helps speed up the process immensely. The issue is when you haven't registered them in your Pokédex yet. Because of this, I honestly didn't think I was going to have footage of Entei in time for this review, because it took me an additional 15 hours of playtime just so I could finally find and catch the dumb mutt, and with my Master Ball no less. Now normally I wouldn't be too harsh on something like this, as it's sort of this optional thing, but in Crystal it's surprisingly a lot more important. If you want to catch Ho-Oh in the game, you need to catch all 3 legendary beasts. That means you need a Haunter or some other Pokemon that knows Mean Look, you need dozens of Ultra Balls, and most importantly, you need tons of time and even more luck than that. Then finally, maybe you can encounter the other 2 dogs, capture them, and climb up the Tin Tower to catch Ho-Oh. But that's only if they don't use Roar first. But this is honestly the only part of this game that I actually despise. The other things I've mentioned so far are either simply nitpicks or were outweighed completely by an even better feature like the Kanto problem I mentioned. Final verdict. So yeah, overall Game Freak set out to give players the definitive Pokemon experience, and in my opinion, with this game, they delivered. It may not exactly hold up graphically today, but in my humble opinion, this game has aged exceptionally well when compared to its previous incarnation. The battle mechanics are better and more balanced than ever, new additions like breeding and shiny Pokemon give the game added flavor, the rivalry is handled in a mature and impactful way, the Pokemon designs are mostly all welcomed, each area feels fresh and memorable, and you get 2 friggin' regions and a final battle with Red all in one action-packed game. But honestly, I think I've talked enough. The truth is, this game still holds up today, and unlike Red, Blue, and Yellow, the originals are still worth playing, even if the remakes are even better. So with all that in mind, and pouring over 80 hours into my review playthrough, I have to award this generation an 8.5 out of 10. It's as perfect a sequel as you can get, and one of the most memorable from the entire series of games. But the remake and Game Boy graphics retroactively lower the score in 2015, as there's an even better way to experience these games if you're a newcomer to the franchise. Either way, you can't go wrong with 3 of the best Pokemon games ever introduced, and the best gift I've ever received on Christmas morning. Well, there you have it, guys. The second generation of Pokemon games is finally under my review belt, but more importantly, this was the final RandomTens video of 2015. I hope you had as much fun watching it as I had making it, but before we go, there's a few more things that we have to address. First off, thank you so much for supporting this channel and helping us reach our goal of 20,000 subscribers. A year ago to this very day, we only had 1,000 subscribers, so this jump has been absolutely insane, so thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And to celebrate the enormous milestone, and because we're heading into 2016, we're about to update our channel art across all of our social media and YouTube channels. That's right, brand new banners, a brand new logo, and even a new character avatar designed by the incredible SHIELD Draws will all be coming within the new year. I commissioned SHIELD a few months ago to design both a new logo and that character avatar I mentioned, and I think we can all agree the man does incredible work. I would seriously appreciate it if you guys checked him out at his YouTube channel, Shield Draws. I will leave an annotation on the adorable Raichu's face right there, so click it, make sure you click it, and I will also leave his contact information in the description of this video. I'm telling you, the guy works hard, he's obviously an expert at what he does, and he's all around a really good guy too. I also have to give a major shout out to the one and only Oddsauce for contributing 3 new character avatars that we'll probably be using in Twitter and throughout videos and whatnot in 2016. And I should also mention, Oddsauce designed all of this for free. Everybody at the channel loves Oddsauce, and we think you will too. So please check out his YouTube channel by clicking an annotation I will put on Umbreon and Charizard kind of area. Please check him out. He's seriously, he's just an amazing friend and a really great artist as well. And finally, it's time to officially say goodbye to 2015 as the new year approaches. I'm going to be taking about a week off to just kind of recharge after this disgustingly long review. But after I come back, look forward to a bunch of new 5 random facts and fan-requested videos. I promise you, it's going to be an excellent January. I can feel it in my baby bones. But before we go, I want to leave one little gift as kind of a big thank you. It's this little montage I made for, you know, saying thanks because we reached 20,000 subscribers, which I didn't think we were going to do. It's probably going to be really weird and super cringeworthy, but I don't know, 2015 was the best year of my life, and a lot of that is thanks to you guys. So I wanted to make something really weird that would be memeable, I guess. I don't know. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the montage, and happy hunting, baby rhinos. See you in 2016.